Okay, if you have your Bibles, open up to John chapter 4. We started going through the book of John in a series we've titled Unexpected, and we're looking at the astonishing life with Jesus and these astonishing, surprising moments with Jesus. And Rhoda read a few minutes ago about an interaction that Jesus has with a woman. And it's a surprising interaction because Hebrew men in first century Israel did not stop and talk to women, let alone Samaritan women. But he has this conversation with her, and the question is why? And he's trying to teach us something. But let me back up and just kind of give you the story behind the animosity that the Jewish people had for the Samaritans. It went back about 700 years. When the Babylonians, before Jesus, 700 years before him, the Babylonians had taken the Hebrew people into captivity. But when they took them, they did not take everyone. There was a remnant left behind. This remnant was living in Canaan among the Canaanite tribes. So of course, they started to intermarry with them. But then worse in the eyes of the Hebrew people and the religious ones is that these people left behind began to worship some of the Canaanite gods. They created this synchronistic religion of Judaism with some of the Canaanite gods, small g, and not only intermarried, but they also were worshiping someone other than Yahweh. And so when the Jewish people finally gained their freedom and started to come back to Jerusalem and Judah, they found these Samaritans, people who had intermarried with the Canaanite people, worshiping the wrong gods. They physically drove them out of Judea. They drove them out of Jerusalem. They drove them north. I have a map here, if you can see it, if your eyes are good. But on this map, you'll see Samaria right in the middle. You have Galilee to the north, where Jesus is from this town of Nazareth. To the south is Jerusalem. Now, if you wanted to travel like Jesus was from Galilee to Jerusalem, you had to go through Samaria. But the most devout Jews refused. They despised the Samaritans so much they even refused to walk through Samaria. So they would go east across the Jordan River. You can see it running north-south there, and come down through modern-day Jordan and then cross back just so they didn't have to interact with the Samaritan people. But then Jesus comes along and he begins to flip the script on the way we do life. And he began to move toward the other. He began to move toward people of the other ethnicity, of the other gender, of the other religion, and move toward them and embrace them and include them. And that's why people wanted to kill him. So I'm going to start with this. So Jesus, if we go back to our passage, let's go back to John chapter 4, verse 7. And we read, this Samaritan woman came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" And the Samaritan woman, underlined those two words because that's a double negative in the eyes of the Jewish people. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew. I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Because Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And so Jesus is moving toward her, but you can sense that she's ashamed. She's ashamed of her Samaritanness. She's ashamed of the fact that he should not be speaking to her because she's different from him in every way. She's a different gender. She's a different ethnicity. She speaks a different language. Her skin tone is different. But he reaches out to her. And we'll see in a minute, he starts to talk about a water, a living water. And I want to put this statement on the board because he says this water is for everyone. And I'll start with this idea. This water is for everyone, like the Samaritan woman who feels shame. The Jewish people of his day, especially the most religious ones, operated on a currency of guilt and shame. And Jesus comes along and he starts to unshame people. He says, you don't have to be ashamed of who you are. And in Jesus' day, the lepers were the despised ones, were the despicable ones. Leprosy was a sickness, and sickness was a sign of a sin, and sin was as contagious as the pink eye, so you avoided the lepers. You avoided the sinners. You avoided foreigners and immigrants. They were the despicable ones. You avoided especially the Samaritans and the Samaritan women, but Jesus starts to break down these walls and these barriers and move toward the other. I said that I think she's ashamed of her Samaritanness. She feels this despicable nature. Maybe you've seen a film that came out it was an animated film. I was watching it with my sons. It's called Despicable Me. And if you've seen it, so there's this opening scene. You have the kids are living in an orphanage. And if you've ever felt despicable or less than, watch this movie because it will lift up your spirit. So one of the opening scenes, they're in this orphanage that the kids are trapped in by this mean, ugly woman. Not ugly in the physical sense, but the way she treated them, mean-spirited woman named Miss Hattie. And Miss Hattie had a box she made, and she wrote on it, "The Box of Shame." And if you didn't eat your vegetables, and if you didn't make your bed, you got put in here. You see the eyes poking out, and they're actually Is this one moving? Last hour, it was moving. This one froze on us. We're going to try it again, something like that. Well, who knows? There we go. They're blinking eye. But he's in the box of shame. And I don't know if you've ever spent time in the box of shame. The unfortunate truth is that sometimes in churches, people are shamed. And I grew up hopefully you grew up in a different environment, but I felt like, just like first century Israel, among the very religious people, I grew up in a culture that operated on guilt and shame. That shame was the motivator to get people to move toward God. I know that because when I was a kid, when I was in third grade, I remember clearly there was a board on the Sunday school room wall, and if every time you were there, you got a gold star. If you memorized the Bible verse of the day, you got a gold star. Memorizing Bible verses are great, but you got a gold star for that. And so we memorized them the way an NFL quarterback memorizes a playbook. I mean, we were on it. If you brought a friend, you got a gold star. If you brought your Bible, you got a gold star. The problem is, my parents traveled a lot. So I only made it to church that was our church, maybe once a month. And so as the year went on, Palmer would have like 3 stars, and everybody else had 23 stars, 33 stars. And the further the year went, the more I felt shamed going to church. And I realized that I think maybe the people running that church, they didn't use the gold stars so much as a way to reward those who did something good. I think the gold stars were there to shame those who did not perform. And it made me, and this is what shaming in churches still does, it makes good people give up on church and give up on God. I think when our private struggles, like this woman's, we'll read about her struggles in a minute, become public, it's shaming. And even in church, that's been the way it's been. When people find out about your addiction, we feel shame. If they find out about your struggling marriage, we feel shame. If they find out about your rebelling teenager, you feel shame. If they find out about your lost job, you feel shame. And because that's happened so often in churches and the churches I was in, that's one of my great motivations in founding and helping to found the Grove. If you come here, I want this to be a place where no one feels shame. That you know that Jesus Christ reaches out his arms like he does to this woman, and he invites her in. And so here's what shame does as we talk about it. Shame makes us feel less than. I don't know if you've ever felt inadequate or insufficient or not good enough, but this woman definitely felt less than. She felt less than the Jews. She felt less than because she was a woman. She felt less than because she was a foreigner and an immigrant. And she felt less than because of all those things. She was an outsider, and she was not married, and so she felt less than everyone else. And then Jesus comes along, and he starts to value people like that. I think shame, as I thought about shame this week, shame is worse than guilt. Because shame says what you did is who you are. For example, guilt says things like, you did something bad. Shame says you are bad. Guilt says, I don't like what I did. Shame says you are what you did. I think sometimes by mistake, parents even use shaming language with their children. We say, don't be a crybaby. Or we say, good boys don't do that. Or we say, grow up. Or we say, don't be a baby. Don't be a sissy. That's all shaming phrases. Or you should be ashamed of yourself. And I've even seen some parents shame their grown children to try to get them to cooperate or to conform or to do the things that they want them to. And it's tragic and it's sad. Because think about Jesus Christ. Think about God. God never withheld love to teach somebody a lesson. He never shames us to try to get us to conform. He embraces us in spite of the mistakes that we make. But love, if you use love, or the lack of it, or withhold it to get someone to do something you want them to do, it ruins love, doesn't it? And that's the entire heartbeat of the Bible, is love without conditions, isn't it? And so Jesus comes and he starts to embody this, and he starts to embrace the least and the last and the lowest of them. I think in life, if you're honest about it, at some point, we all feel shamed to some degree. At some point, it's going to happen. Maybe it's happened recently. I know that several years ago, my wife and I were in San Diego. We're visiting our son and in college. And it was early in the morning, and we had gone to look for bagels. And we stopped at a bagel shop, and she said, "I'll go in without you." And so she went in, and then about 10, 12 minutes later, she comes back and she's crying, and she gets in the car and she's crying. And I'm saying, what's wrong? What could possibly be wrong? We're in the most beautiful place on earth, the happiest place on earth, San Diego. You know, it's summer in Arizona, and we're eating bagels, and she's crying. She said, "I'm so embarrassed." She said, "I couldn't find my wallet." I said, "Well, it's okay. I've got my wallet." She said, "No, the woman behind the counter kept saying it's $9.98. It's $9.98, and I'm digging through my purse, and I couldn't find my wallet. I know I had my wallet when I went in there." And then she said, "It took so long, a young man, a professional-looking young man in a shirt and a tie came up, and he paid for my bagels. I think he thought I was homeless." And so she's crying. I go, "Well, you're not homeless." And so I went in, and the wallet was on the floor somewhere. But because she felt less than able to pay, there's this shame. And maybe that's happened to you. If maybe you've had your credit card denied or your debit card, and you go, "Oh, it's just a bad magnetic strip." We say that. You've probably felt shame. If you've ever lost your job, you've felt shame. If you've ever been given a D or worse, an F, you felt shame. If your application's been denied, you felt shame. If anyone has ever broken off the engagement with you, you felt shamed. If you've wanted to have a baby for years and years and you can't, you felt shamed. If in junior high, and this happened to all of us, you ever sat alone at lunch, you know what it feels like to feel shame. I've heard it said that purgatory is real. It's called junior high. That's what I've heard. If you've been married 5 times, like we're going to read this woman has, you feel shame. But what does Jesus say to her in spite of all of this? Let's go back to verse 14, and we read this. Jesus says, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but everyone who drinks the water I give them will never be thirsty." Do you get that? He says, this water is for everyone. The shame ends with me. Bring it to me. I want to say next that I think our shame is often tied to our scars in life. I think this woman has 5 scars. I want you to look at verse 16 and 17 with me. Jesus says to her, so they're having this conversation. He says, "Go call your husband." And she says in verse 17, "I have no husband," she replied. And Jesus said, by the way, she tells a partial truth. And he says, "You're right when you say I have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you're with right now is not your husband." She has 5 very deep wounds, 5 deep scars on her heart. We don't know if her husband's died or if her husband's divorced her, but either way, it's 5 very deep wounds. I think I know just a little bit about scars because I've had one that I'll never forget. What happened is we moved back to Chandler from Malawi, and I hadn't been to a doctor in years, and I told Veronica, I said, "I have a sore here that won't heal." And I said, I think I have leprosy. She said, you're crazy. But anyway, that was just what I thought. So she said, go have it checked. So I went to a dermatologist, and she looked at it. She said, oh, it's a basal cell carcinoma. I go, well, what's that? I had no idea. She said, it's precancerous. I said, what? I thought I was going to die. I thought I had like a week or two. And she said, we can cut it out. I said, well, you cut the whole thing out. Just make sure you get it all. And I said, I need it done right now. She said, okay, but I have a next appointment, but I'll have my intern come in and she'll cut it out. And so the intern came in with a scalpel and a smile on her, did I get scalpel? And a smile on her face. And what I didn't know was that this was an intern in the very early stages of interning, maybe the very early hours of interning. And so she gets the knife, and I said, hey, don't be shy about cutting into me. I want that whole thing gone. And don't ever say that to a dermatologist. Don't let them get what they need to get. So she starts sawing. I'm serious, sawing like on a piece of tough sirloin. She's sawing. And I'm like, what's happening? And then I start bleeding, and she panics. She started yelling, I have a bleeder. And people come running in, and they're trying to stop the bleeding. Finally, she starts sewing me back up with a touch of like a ringside cut man. She's sewing me up. I'm going, what are you doing? So many stitches. I'm wondering how long this thing is. And then I say, can I have a mirror? She says, no. I'm serious. She said, no. She bandaged it. She said, don't look at it for 24 hours. I go, why? And she said, it needs to heal. Great. So I go, finally, I wait 24 hours. I take off the bandage, and I almost yelled out loud. I did. I said, Veronica, I have this. Now, you think I'm exaggerating, but it looked like a 6-inch wound across the size of a Tylenol, and it went from here to here, and it looked like a badly laced football. And I'm like, if I'm vulnerable here, my first thought was, I'll never be able to wear the deep V-neck like Simon Cowell. I'll never be able to wear that shirt again. And I said, look, Veronica, I look like Frankenstein. She says, oh, it will heal. Well, it doesn't. And so I called the dermatologist. I said, this big, giant wound is not healing. She said, don't worry. Go to Walgreens. They sell something called Mederma there, and it'll take it away. I bought the stuff. Can I just say this? I hope none of you represent the product, because it does not work. And it's a placebo. I'm just telling you, it does not work. Then 2 weeks later, after this major surgery, she could have taken my lung out while she was at it. We're scheduled to go to Cancun. I'm doing a friend's wedding. And so I did what most of you would have done. I went to a girl shop in the mall that sold necklaces, and I bought a giant medallion. And I feel so much shame sharing this with you, but it's what happened, and I can't lie to you. And so I hang this medallion here with a gold chain on it. And I go to the beach in Cancun. I look like Mr. T. On the beach. My friends are calling me John Travolta because of the big gold chain. And all week I'm thinking, the medallion's not big enough. Forget about how ridiculous you look. And I say that because most of our scars and our wounds are not physical. They're from something like 5 divorces or 5 losses of someone we love. We all have these scars that run much deeper than something on the surface, don't we? And then we try to do the thing of hanging cheap medallions over our scars so that hopefully no one else will see them. We try to hide them from everyone else, and our cheap medallions end up being maybe a new outfit or even a new car or even a new house, hoping something like a magician we can distract everyone else from the scar that's there, and they'll just see that. Or a new job or a new office or a new set of golf clubs or something to hide the scars. And Jesus sees this woman's scars. He knows it well. He says, you have 5 husbands. The man you're living with is not your husband. But then it's okay. This water, this living water is for you. You can stop hiding your wounds. I love who Henry Nouwen calls Jesus. Henry Nouwen calls him the wounded healer. Because as Isaiah says, it's by his wounds we are healed. There's this really interesting story in the Talmud about a Rabbi Joshua ben Levi meeting Elijah. And Rabbi ben Levi is talking to Elijah, and he says, when will the Messiah ever come? And Elijah says, go ask him yourself. And Rabbi Ben Levi says, what? He's here? And Elijah says, yes, he's sitting at the city gates. And Rabbi Ben Levi says, well, how am I going to know who he is? There's so many people at the city gates. And he says, well, when you go there, you'll see a lot of people binding their wounds, trying to cover all of their wounds. He says, but the Messiah is the one who only binds one wound at a time. And he's binding one wound at a time so that at any moment he can go to someone else who needs help binding their own wounds. That's why Henry Nouwen calls Jesus the wounded healer. And like Rabbi Ben Levi, the woman says, where is this Messiah? Look at verse 26, and Jesus says, I am here. Do you see how his own wounds become the source of healing for her, and then for you, and for me? Isaiah says it like this, Isaiah 58, verse 5, we read 53, he was wounded because of our rebellious deeds, crushed because of our sins. He endured punishment that made us well. Because of his wounds, we have been healed. I want to say this next. I said this water that Jesus brings is for everyone who's ever felt shame. This water is for everyone who's ever tried to hide a scar. And then finally, I want to say this morning, this water is for everyone who's hiding secrets. And that's who this woman was. She has a secret, verse 17. If we go back to our passage, and I read it a moment ago, Jesus says, you are right when you say, I have no husband. Because the fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not your husband. She tells a half-truth, I have no husband. She's just trying to hide it. Every person who's lived on planet Earth, we have secrets. I bought a car a few years ago and with a blown engine. I didn't know it was a blown engine, and so I'm talking to my friend in the car business, and I said, but the guy who sold it to me said it was just an upper engine tick. Maybe it's the lifters is what he said. And my buddy said, well, Palmer, were his lips moving? I said, yes, they were. He said, well, if his lips are moving and he's selling a car, he's lying. That's what he said. That's what they say in the car business. But the truth is, we all carry secrets. Maybe it's something you did and you're ashamed of and you're hiding. Maybe it's a secret that you're carrying right now. I think our secrets are interwoven and tied to our shame and to our scars, and we don't want that to become public. But Jesus comes along with this woman, and he says, I know you have 5 husbands. It's okay. This water is still for you. You can stop the hiding. Stop the hiding because our secrets become our greatest obsessions in many ways. It becomes the one thing that controls our life, something we did in the past and we can't let out. Maybe you've heard of the great Russian literary by the name of Tolstoy. Tolstoy is 19th century. But Tolstoy writes about his brother. And he says his brother, when he was younger, when he was small, would have him stand in the corner of the living room. He says, okay, close your eyes and put your head in the corner. He says, okay, now, Tolstoy, there's a bear coming down the hallway. It's a giant white bear. Its teeth are as long as a rake, and it's got giant claws, 6 inches long, and it's rushing at you, and it's hungry, and there's drool coming out of its mouth. And he says, now, Tolstoy, I want you to not think about the bear at all. That's what he told him. And Tolstoy is 9 years old. He's going, all I could think about, he said, the more I tried to not think about the bear, the more I was obsessed by the bear. Researchers have found this about the secrets that we try to hide, that if we have secrets that we can't let go of and we sit in a room, then everything in the room begins to remind us of that secret. The couch, the painting on the wall, the book on the shelf, everything begins around us, starts to tie us to it, and we can't be free of it. And so Jesus comes along and he says, you don't have to hide anymore. You know, the wounded healer says the secrets you can let go. I want to invite you to a spiritual practice today. Maybe you've never practiced this before. And many call it the practice of deep honesty. It's a spiritual practice of being honest with another godly man or woman. Now, don't practice this with just anyone or casually. But I invite you at the Grove to find a godly man or woman who you can sit down with over coffee or in your living room or at the Grove Coffee and start to honestly tell them about what's happening. I heard Young, what's his first name? Doesn't matter. William Young, author of The Shack, was talking about his story, and he said, I'll read you what he said. He says, when I became honest about my trouble, my reputation went out the window, but I became the freest man in the universe. You see, secrets are liars. Secrets don't tell you the whole truth. Secrets don't tell you that they will ruin your marriage. Secrets don't tell you they will bankrupt you. Secrets don't tell you they will cost you your job. Secrets don't tell you they will cause your children to turn their backs on you. Our secrets are a liar. And if we keep holding them on the inside, we can never live the life God calls us to. We can never be free of them. There's a pastor who writes about being invited to an AA meeting. He said, he had been in church his whole life, but he says this, most Christians are dishonest. He said, I went to an AA meeting and I learned what honesty was all about. I have what he writes on the board. He writes, what struck me was that the people there were honest about themselves to others. As I sat there, it was as if I could really see for the first time just how much time and energy and effort we expend making sure that everybody knows how strong, smart, quick, competent, capable, together, and good we are. It's hard to see just how much that posturing consumes us until you're in a room where that is absent. A room where people aren't doing any of that because they're giving their energies to admitting honestly who they are. Verse 23, Jesus does the most interesting thing. He invites this woman to that kind of life. Verse 28, I said 23. It's who you are and the way you live that count before God. Our worship must engage your spirit in the pursuit of truth. That's the kind of people the Father is out looking for, those who are simply and honestly themselves before Him in worship. And so today I invite you to this practice of deep honesty. And then I'll end with this. I said that Jesus was the wounded healer. Do you know how this story ends? It has the most fascinating ending. God uses this woman with all her scars and all her wounds, to become the wounded healer to others. He uses her as an apostle of healing to others. Look at verse 26 and 28. Then leaving her water jar behind, she was so disturbed by the whole thing, she runs off without her jar. The woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. Move down to verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him, and then underline this, because of the woman's testimony. So God uses her scars, her wounds, to become a source of healing to the people of her town. And you see, when you can finally be honest, when you can stop hiding the things that you think ruin your reputation, then God can use your life even more. I hope that at the Grove, God can help you to be that honest person, because He wants you to become the wounded healer, a source of healing to people in your workplace, in your neighborhood, to your next door neighbor, in your schools. That's who you're called to be.